Welcome to the Leader More podcast. Our motive is to pass on what we've found helpful over the years through leading teams, running operations, and dealing with life's challenges. We hope you enjoy. How's your week been, Scott?
Yeah, good. I've just been a bit busy. How about you?
Why have you been busy? What have you been doing?
Just, people pleasing. Telling people, like, oh yeah, I'll do that for you. And then realizing, I was already at capacity. Now I've got to bloody sacrifice 2 hours of sleep to do what you want me to do. So.
Sounds like a habit.
Yeah, I'm in the thickness of it. So how about you?
Yeah, good week. South Perth Lions, 2 for 2.
Oh, dude, actually. Oh, wow. That's not very common, is it?
We've doubled our win percentage on last year in the first 2 rounds, which is nice.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah.
I don't hear that very often.
Oh, thanks, Scott. Throw a knife in. I was with a group of leaders as well. It was a really good workshop, but I had an interesting conversation throughout it with one of them where they were sort of talking around, I have a team, there's a agreed standard, and they're just not following it. And it's so frustrating because they know what the standard is and they continually keep going outside of that standard.
Yeah.
And it was a great conversation, and hence why I want to bring it up and talk through it today and get your thoughts on it. But the honest feedback that I had to give to this leader was that, like it or not, you've allowed that behavior to continue because you haven't maintained a standard. You've set a standard, but you haven't maintained the standard.
Yeah.
And I think in broad terms, setting standards is quite easy. You can do whatever you want, but maintaining and having people follow standards is the hard thing. And that goes back to what we've been speaking about over the last few episodes about, I see building a relationship is really the starting point of that, because people are not going to listen to you unless there's a relationship there, or they're less likely to.
Yeah.
They'll only listen to you because of that first level of leadership in regards to, hey, if I don't, I'm going to get fired. They're the leader, they're the manager, and I've just got to do what they say or I'll lose my job, compared to level 2 where they're very much, they respect you and will follow you because they want to. So it was just interesting, and I was looking at sort of the different types of standards, and this one was more a behavioural standard. So the expectation of how you greet people, how you interact with each other, what you do when things go wrong, all that sort of stuff that isn't necessarily outlined in a company or a team's policy and procedures. And then obviously you have your policy and procedures, which covers safety and respectful workplaces and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
But I felt bad given the feedback to...
Well, circle back to the beginning here, because if we're going to talk about standards, it's good that you actually bring that up, because we can start with barriers to standards. And the thing that you bring up and having to be open and honest with your client is, hearing that feedback of, you've allowed this, is your first barrier to standards, right? Whether or not you're able to introspect and go, you know what, you're right, I have allowed this and this is my fault that this is happening. Getting past that is your first barrier to actually maintaining standards. If you don't have that, then you give me that feedback and you say, hey, maybe you've allowed this. And I go, no, screw you. It's my team. It's the children who are wrong. And then that cuts it off right from the beginning. And we're not interested in standards anymore. We're interested in about something a bit more primitive, I want to feel good about myself, and my team are the ones who are bad, not me.
Yeah. But also to that dynamic, Scotty, of, and I don't know whether there's any sort of research on this sort of stuff, but that dynamic of just being told that it's the complete opposite to what you feel.
Yeah.
And if you don't have a relationship or you don't respect a person giving you that feedback, you're less likely to follow it and more likely to go, hey, no, I'm going the way I want to go,
Well, it's the same thing when we talked about motives, right? And I'm pretty sure we've discussed this exact thing, which is, if you don't know someone well enough, you just assume their motives are bad. They're just telling me this so that they can think that they're better than me or that they've got the answers and I don't. So you're right, having that relationship is important. But yeah, in terms of like the behavioral standards and the workplace standards, what sort of things are you talking about there?
Well, the situation that we were talking about was more so around what you do when you get to work first.
Yep.
So there's probably some behaviors that she wasn't happy with in regards to the management of people's times. Not that they were going outside of any policy or procedure, but they knew what was important from the start, and their prioritizing of how things were done was the concern. So turning up on time, which was okay, but then wanting to have a chat for 15 minutes about stuff instead of doing some really key,
Yeah.
operational tasks that needed to happen to really set
Yeah.
up the day.
I would have been out the door.
And then having that, what do you mean out the door?
Well, I was famous for rocking up to work and then taking 2 hours to warm up.
Wanting to have a chat. And there's probably a second part to that too, like an operating standard work practice of
Yep.
what's expected in a particular day. And they obviously haven't got to that detail, which not a lot of places do get to. But again, you holding someone to the standards that you've put out there, standards that you know that you live by, and then that expectation just that they should do the same just
Yep.
because you have those standards, and how that's just false, and how people just won't do that just because you've got that standard doesn't mean that they have that
Yeah.
standard.
I actually love this topic, and I speak about this a lot, which is like organizational standards versus personal standards. And sometimes it's dangerous to hold people accountable to your personal standards. Like, to be productive at work, I have to run 5 kilometers because that's how I get my mind running and things like that. And then pushing that on others going, hey, you know what, everyone, we should all start a group chat and start running at 5 a.m. so that we all come to work all productive and stuff, which is like a personal standard, right? Which is not necessarily appropriate to push that on others because maybe others don't need that sort of stimulant to get going in the morning. And some people do bring that into the workplace with little things, whether it being organizational requirements around the workplace, like everything must be organized in a certain manner. And some people are completely adept at just working in a chaotic environment. Their standard isn't to have everything placed in rows and, sorted by color and alphabetically. They can have it all over the place and just work perfectly fine. But then obviously you have the other side of that, which is organizational standards, which is, well, I'm paying you money, so at minimum you should be,
Aligning to
doing
the
this sort
agreed
of thing.
standard.
Yeah.
That's the hard thing, because obviously if you've got a good induction process and you run through the expectations and everyone's clear from the start and you're signing a contract which binds you to that, essentially that frustration from a leadership point of view is like they've signed this. They're purposely going out of that. They're throwing it back in my face,
Yeah.
like they're doing this on purpose. Just the little logistical things like, you start on the first day, you're more concerned about, hey, what's this going to be like? Where do I put my lunch? Do I bring lunch? Have I made the right choice? What are the people like? Are they going to like me? All this sort of stuff. And you're going through these bits of paperwork, and a lot of it you don't necessarily read or take in, even if you do. So just those little common sort of things is that, hey, I've just forgotten that. There's lots to take in, and it hasn't been front of mind. So the reminders, the maintenance side of thing falls apart, and that's where that frustration comes from. And my feedback was not to necessarily upset this leader, but more so just get them to understand is that the maintaining of standards is a really important aspect, and you could argue the most important aspect. It'd be really lovely that human beings would say, we give them one instruction and they follow that instruction until the end of the time, until we say, don't follow that instruction anymore and now do this instead. But that's not how we work, right? And it'd be pretty weird if that's how we did work, right?
Yeah,
but we have these expectations that that's how we should. And then we get frustrated about that.
Yeah.
And then we blame them for that.
Yeah, that's
It's odd when you really break it down, but very common. And you can understand that. Like I've been in that position many a times. But yeah, it's funny when you think of it in that context.
You're right. That the frustration around it doesn't help. The whole, why can't you guys just do what you told me? Like, why can't you just be more like me? Like,
Well, there's a self-serving, there's a psychological factor there, which
absolutely
does arc back to leadership motives and what we discussed there. But
yeah,
that's natural for us to get to that point. I have
absolutely.
this standard, I can do it. Why can't you? I've got all this stuff going on in my world, and you don't have a lot to be responsible for. And you can't get the one of four things where I can get it, and I've got 100 things to worry about.
Yeah, it's difficult. And some of the ways that I navigate this frustration is the same thing that I've just talked about, which is like we all have our standards set at a different level. And if we decompose what a standard is, like, well, are we born with it? Are we taught it? Is a standard just a habit that we've practiced over time? Just remembering that, like, my standard for something is at this level and someone else may be at this level or even higher than me. I've just got to remember that that task for me or that standard for me is easy because either I was, born with that standard somehow. I don't know how that works. Or I was taught that standard and I've practiced that standard. So of course it's going to be easier for me. If I've squatted 200 kilos for the last 2 years, which I have over and over again, I can't expect someone who's never been to the gym before to just come in and then start squatting 200 kilos. Like, I've had practice at that and it's easy for me. For them, they've got to start from the bottom and they've got to start at 10 kilos and they've got to inject their own steroids and
the truth is revealed, Scott.
And do their own work to build that standard up. And an analogy that we can use is in maintaining those standards is the whole gardening one, which we've talked about, which is, you start off with the foundations, you're planting the seeds, but then you got to remember to water the seeds and you got to come back to it day in, day out. And
you got to get rid of the weeds.
Yeah. Take the weeds out.
Well, yeah. And, maybe a little bit weird of analogy, but very fitting is like watering a garden is easy. Like it's actually a nice thing to do. But weeding for some reason is hard. And if you looked at it from a maintaining standards point of view, yeah, it's good to give positive feedback and it's great when things are growing and people are following what you'd hope that they would follow, and you can then water that type of behavior and let it continue to flourish. But then when there's a goddamn weed that comes up and they keep coming up and it's just like, I don't want to do this, or, I ain't got time for this, it'll be fine. And then obviously it overgrows the veggie garden. So it is very relevant, and having those difficult conversations, not leaning into, those perceived conflict situations, which everything in our brain is telling us, no, go away, don't do that, steer clear, is an important factor of maintaining standards. Having assertive conversations around, this is the standard and this is probably where you're going and we need you to come back to be doing, this for these reasons, is an important aspect. And as we started with that, building relationships and having a good relationship will really help that, getting rid of those weeds and bad habits, that will really help that and make that really efficient. If you don't have that, that's where you get to, what I like to call the FU principle. Is like, yeah, you told me that. I know why you told me that. I probably agree with you, but I don't like you. So F you. I'm going to do what I want to do here. And I'm just going to keep testing to see how much I can get away with here.
Yeah.
Or do part of it just to show you that I've listened, but then don't do the other part just to be a pain in the butt.
Do the minimum. Yeah.
Scrape by.
And it's something which is actually well studied and there's a name for it in psychology, which is reactance, which is something that teenagers do a lot. And you've got teenagers at the moment, so you would know. You tell them one thing and they internalize that instruction as almost an impedance on their freedom. So they'll do the other thing just to exude power over you. So it is something that happens, and it's no different from teenagers and adults. If your methodology is just, I'm going to keep barking commands at you. If every time you do this wrong, I'm going to keep giving instruction to you. If people don't internalize that in the way that you think they will, they're just going to do the opposite, and they're going to, pull your scientific term, like the fuck you card every time and go, no, fuck you.
And look, very prevalent, I suppose, in my household at the moment with what my wife and I are dealing with 3 teenagers. But you're right, and the teenager thing is a good one because you do fall into the trap as a parent, is that you just feel that you can tell them what to do because you're their parent, and that's probably how you've been brought up. Like I know with my mum and dad, that was very much do as you're told. You don't speak until you're spoken to, and all this sort of stuff. Children should be seen and not heard. So you come from that type of habit base and relationship, right, with your parents to. That stuff seeps through into your parenting. And then, well, hey, I'm barking these orders and these commands, and hey, it's frustrating. And how many times have I got to tell my 13-year-old, hey, this is what you should do? And, what are you doing? Like, you should be doing this. Hurry up. And you get to the point where there's so much frustration there because teenagers are great because they, it's death by 1,000 paper cuts. Like they're little torture machines at time, right? They test you. But you can get to that point where you fall into the trap of just barking orders instead of sitting down after dinner and actually going and saying, look, this is where we're at. This is why we were doing what we were doing previously. We've gone away from that. We need to understand that it's not just about what you want. It's about our family, and it's about what everyone within the family needs. Yeah. And these are the expectations, and having a calmer conversation so they get their point across as well.
Yeah.
But that's hard. That takes time, and it's a good parallel, that's for sure.
Which is why I don't just see the standards piece, not just setting, but also maintaining standards. I don't just see it as this habit-forming procedure. I think there's a lot of persuasion to do with standards as well. And in what you're talking about, just telling the teens, hey, do this and do this, you might get to the point where they just do it because they've learnt that, well, if I just do this, then dad's not going to come up and be cringe to my face and tell me and bark commands at me. What you want to get to is that point of internalization where they're going, I'm not doing this because dad's telling me to do it. I'm doing this because I think it's the right thing to do. And that's where the persuasion piece comes in, because you've got to use some techniques and do what you can with the personality that you're dealing with to not just make it so that they're going, well, I'm going to do this because my organization requires me to do this. But you want to get them to that point where they go, well, actually, I'm going to hit my KPI because it's the right thing to do. And that's what I'm being paid to do. And it's going to have good outcomes for the organization. It's going to have good outcomes for me. So that's a little bit of a tricky one, because what we want, if we go back to the gym analogy, we want everyone to just come into the gym and start lifting 200 kilos, but you do have to start from scratch. And if you want that internalization process to start, you have to work with the person individually, sort of understand how they are going to react to your messages. Maybe they react to humor. Some people will react to like strict direction. Like if you're a personality like me, like I'm more of a bloody emotional, I'm a soft touch. So people, oh, Scotty, good job. Like you're so smart and cool. And then I go, oh,
that pushes your buttons.
Yeah, it pushes my buttons. So, yeah, it is annoying to hear, but there is no one solution to getting a standard set and maintained so that you don't have to pull out as many weeds in the garden or water the plants as much as you want.
So on maintaining standards, there's probably a few things that come to mind. So leading by example is a way of doing that.
Yep.
There's other reminders, whether that be administrative reminders of emails or notices on walls and so on and so forth, as well as having assertive conversations, those difficult conversations, and feedback, reward and recognition, which loops into a lot of stuff just around improving productivity. But you look at leading by example, is that obviously as a leader, you have to do that, because if you don't and you have a different behavior to what you're expecting, well, people are just going to see the hypocrisy in that straight away. It just sticks out very obviously. So having that is important, but you can get yourself into a little bit of trouble there. I know there's been situations where there's been an agreed standard, everyone's been trained and it's been communicated on that standard, but that standard has fallen away. So I would use leading by example as a reminder mechanism. So actually physically going out and doing the work, wrapping a pallet or whatever it may be to the standard that it should be, as a subtle way of getting that hint across of how it should be, and maybe some education on the back of that, right?
So this example, like in terms of leading by example, the reason why I love this example is because I've been a victim of it. Whereas I remember I was managing a site once upon a time, and I remember you were managing me, and I remember the standard was the pallet wrapping standard, right? Where we had to do 3 wraps on the bottom, 3 wraps on the top, blah, 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 blah. It was my job to maintain that standard in the warehouse because I was supposed to be training people and doing all those sorts of things. And you came in for a little site visit one time, like you do, just walking around, just, oh, I'm the big boss. Whatever.
Yeah. Who's this clown?
And I remember looking out my little office window and I see you re-wrapping a pallet. And look, my reaction to that was I was absolutely mortified, going, oh my gosh, this is something that I'm supposed to be responsible for. And then the person who's managing me is out there re-wrapping a pallet for everyone to see. Like, it makes me look like an asshole. But, people react to that differently.
Mission accomplished.
Yeah.
That wasn't the point. Yeah.
People react to that differently, right?
Yeah.
Some people might see that and go, oh, sweet. If I don't do what's appropriate, old Danny Green will just waltz in and he'll do it for us. Yeah. He's got all the motivation we need. In my case, and in some of the supervisors who I was working with, we all had a chat about that, and we all felt the same way, which was, I can't believe it came to this, and that we had to have our boss come in and do our work for us. Like, that's how poor we've been performing. So
and look, the intent with this sort of situation wasn't necessarily that, although it's probably, I'm not annoyed that came across, because it's obviously helped, and the outcome is that the pallet standard was a lot different moving forward. It was in a great spot, but I don't know. I just sort of felt in those types of situations, you can always fall in the trap of telling people what to do and being on your soapbox and saying, hey, and I always like leading by example. And I used to do that a lot with sweeping floors, just for the symbolic fact of, okay, well, you've got a supply chain manager here that's out wrapping a pallet or sweeping a floor. Like, no one's above anything here. Like, that's a great example to have. And from my personal end, it's nice for me to get out and do something that you can necessarily just control and get an outcome, instead of influencing something for a period of time and working towards it, and it takes time and you finally get to it, right? So doing some manual tasks to take your mind off things, like, that's a nice distraction, and I enjoy that sort of stuff. But it sends some really nice messages. But then obviously with your personality and the team that you were leading, the group of leaders you had, and even the team below you, like, I think from memory it was like 50 or 60 people, they were all good people. It wasn't an education thing. It wasn't a they don't care thing. It was just, there was lots going on and lots of moving parts, and there just needed to be a subtle reminder about things. And I thought that would be a lot more effective than just pulling together a meeting or having a chat to you and essentially talking down to you, it would come across. Yeah. It wouldn't necessarily...
Which you did a lot.
But that sort of thing. You can get into some tricky spots there, right? Like, if you're a personality where... you alluded to it, is that, oh, well, the boss is here, they'll just do it anyway. Like, if you were that type of personality, there's no way in the world I would have done that.
Yeah.
You would want to try and get them to understand the impact of their actions or their non-actions, and how that affects customers, how that affects the end product, and what we're standing for, and really sort of get buy-in, right? So there's a different approach there. But however, if I went through and just, we need to do this, we need to do that, then they didn't. And then I just started leading by example. They're going to go, hey, all I've got to do is absorb 2 conversations, and this guy does my work for me. Like,
yeah.
I'm set here. How good? Perfect. We don't have to have standards. yeah, sucker. We don't have to have standards. We don't even have to work hard, because this guy, he's gullible. He'll just come and do it for us. Fantastic.
Yeah. Another example that I can bring in terms of maintaining standards is the shock example where you shock people into seeing what they've done.
Like a cattle prod? A taser?
No.
Okay.
I don't think that would be ethical, unless people agree to it. But, you know, just letting people witness the outcomes of them not following a standard. Now, like I said earlier, I think of standards as not just habit building, but also there's a degree of persuasion to it. And if you look at, you know, a lot of research around persuasion, an effective way of persuasion is scaring people. Not scaring them by themselves, but scaring people and then giving them a way forward. So here's the scary picture and here's how to avoid the scary picture.
Yeah.
So I remember in this strategy, I was working with a leader who they had noticed that there was a plethora of rubbish in the warehouse. There was like, you know, empty cartons and plastic and all this sort of stuff. So what they did while everyone was on lunch break, they went around the warehouse, they collected all the cartons and all the plastic and all this stuff, and they piled it in a huge pile, like right outside. So when people come out of the lunchroom, they just see this mountain of rubbish. And that was a really effective strategy, I thought, of getting people to realize the consequence of not following the standard. Because it was like, yeah, you guys just think it's like one carton here and one carton there, but actually this is the result of
the impact of
the impact of us
behavior.
not doing what we're supposed to do. And that alone isn't necessarily an effective standard. That could just make people go, oh, well, wow, that's a lot. But then administering the next step of, guys, we can avoid this if everyone just picked up, you know, there's 20 of you and there's 40 boxes here. In one round of, you know, picking or whatever you're doing, if you just pick up 2 boxes, this problem is gone. And yeah, you saw a reduction in rubbish in the warehouse just because of that activity. There's multiple ways that we can go about tackling, setting and maintaining standards.
Yeah.
It's really dependent on our groups and what we think is the right strategy. A part of me thought that particular leader just did that out of frustration.
They probably did, right?
But the intuition was that, well, maybe this will work. And it did, absolutely.
Yeah, that's good. The thing that comes to mind with the shock is like a good example is like an NPS or a great service scorecard, like a customer service feedback loop. And you actually sit down with your team at the end of every week and go through our feedback and some positives, which is always nice, but then the areas where there needs improvement. And it's just, okay, someone has noticed this and that's not good. That's not up to the standard that I would expect.
Like one of the big players at the moment in almost every industry right now is safety, and like safety as a standard and maintaining it in the workplace and things like that. And it's such a hard one to maintain just because there is that idea that, oh, it's slowing us down. Like we've got to produce this much productivity and doing it in the manner that you want us to do, you know, having to constantly adhere to these safety rules is kind of slowing us down. We could do things easier if we just didn't have to follow that safety piece. And having that safety message or standard internalized is really difficult when, you know, we're having team meetings and we're talking about TRIFR ratings and how much productivity we've lost due to injury in the workplace. And, you know, when I hear that, I think to myself, you know, these guys aren't actually interested in anything related to my health and well-being. They just care about how much productivity they're losing over 1 million hours. And so I think that's the wrong way to internalize the message. I think for me, if, you know, someone did, in that shock example, someone put up, hey, if you're doing an incorrect safety technique over 10 years, this is what can happen to you. And this is how you rectify it by just doing this.
Yeah.
Like I look at that and I go, oh, well, these people actually care about what's happening to me. They're acknowledging that the way I do my job can be harmful to my, you know, life satisfaction and things like that. So I then internalize that and I teach that to other people as well. If I see someone doing something unsafe in, you know, the office or whatnot, I go up to them and I go, oh, don't do that. You can, like, damage yourself by doing that.
Well, this has happened to me, and
Yeah.
this is the result. Or something.
Interesting, actually, is an example in my real life at the moment, which is I used to sit on my legs like a little Japanese woman when I was like a kid. Like, you know how they like bend down and they, you know, that position? Can I demonstrate? Would that be cringe?
Yeah, I don't care. Yeah, go.
Okay, so I used to sit like, is the camera getting this?
I don't know.
When I was a teen,
Yeah, okay.
I used to sit like this.
That's a good stretch that for your the fronts of your quads and your shins. Yeah.
Yeah, it could be a good stretch. Great. Actually, if you sit like this all the time, you like put stress on your patella, and there's like apparently some issues with circulation in your lower legs. So then I was told like, oh, you know, don't sit like that for these reasons. It's bad.
Yeah.
And then so, you know, I've been working with someone recently who is exactly the same, sits like that. And then like, because that person internalized that message with me so long ago, I then like pay that forward almost and go, someone worried about me, so I'm going to like worry about you. And
the example you gave around the triffer, and you went straight to, hey, they don't necessarily care about me. They care about, you know, how many hours lost or what that means for their insurance cover or whatever it may be. Break that down, because there would probably be a cause there, and it's not necessarily the triffer, but the actual relationship prior to that. And there would have been a whole heap of other little interactions that led up to you making that decision that this is what they mean by that, and this is where they're coming from, this is their motive. You know, you don't just hear triffer and go, oh, their motive is this, right? Because the whole triffer
maybe
thing,
I do.
Yeah, but like it depends.
Yeah.
Like you can obviously go into different environments, and that could be very different depending upon the leadership and how they go about it. Because having a safety benchmark is not a bad thing, although it's not a lead indicator and a proactive one, and that's the hard thing to do with safety. However, you know, it's you know, it's a nice and admirable thing to have. But I agree, you can go down the path of, hey, this is only being brought up because they're ticking a box, they're covering their own backside. This is a risk mitigation process, and da-da-da-da-da.
Absolutely.
So what are the little interactions leading up to that within an environment that get you to the point that go, hey, that is the motive.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily about me, it's about something else. And I think there would be a long list of little interactions in that situation. That,
like those interactions would be just directives. In the little Japanese lady example, like me just going, don't sit like that.
Yeah,
and
how
then,
it's come across.
Yeah, and not going, well, why? Like, what's the purpose? And, you know, people like hear those sorts of things in the workplace where they're like, don't lift like that, or, hey, stand up. Oh, you're just telling me what to do. And, you know, sometimes you internalize that as, well, you just like telling people what to do. I think we spoke about it before in terms of like leadership motivations, and like some people are just motivated by that whole, it feels good to be in charge sort of thing. There's the opposite side of what we've talked about in the triffer, where you have maybe someone who has established a good relationship with someone and they are concerned about your well-being, and they've established that. And then they kind of get into the meeting and go, guys, look, it's a part of my job that I talk about this. Bear with me. This is the triffer. This is how many hours of productivity.
You're making excuses for...
If I knew someone on a personal level and I knew like that they were genuinely looking after my well-being, it actually wouldn't matter to me that they were portraying that sort of, you know, corporate mumbo jumbo. So the little interactions that I'm thinking of that would impact that sort of, you know, relationship and lead to those sorts of ideals with leaders is that someone who just comes up to me and just barks commands. So, you know,
clipboard warrior style is a good one from a safety point of view, like just picking at all the things you do
and not
right.
necessarily going, you did this wrong, this is how you should do it, or did you know that this is the impact of what you're doing? That's the sort of behavior which I feel like would lead up to me being suspicious of why someone is giving me certain information. On the flip side, you could have someone who is actually very present and very concerned about you, and who walks around the warehouse going, oh no, please don't do that. I've seen this happen. Someone blew their knees out or whatever. And there is real concern, But then you go up into the big meeting and they start talking about the triffer, and you can kind of then empathize with them a little bit, going, oh, I get it. This is a requirement of your role. Your boss wants you to talk about this, but they don't necessarily have that sort of concern that you have for me. So then, you have a scenario where they are still reporting triffer, but you're still internalizing it really well, just because you know that they have that genuine relationship with you and that they are concerned about your well-being.
Another area is around just being too focused on the standards. So, for instance, getting to a point where the actual trophy or having your triffer rate at a certain point becomes the overarching goal, and you forget why that goal is important. Yeah. And people can see through the fact is that, hey, they've got this standard because all they want to do is compete against other sites or make their site look fantastic, or they just want this. They don't really care about me, but that's the reason why it should be there. So you're losing sight of that. And you see it in sports a lot, people focusing more on a trophy than the little behaviors and the reason why you want to get to that point, and just focusing on that end point and the glory of something, the trophy of it, means that you're not going to get to it. You lose sight of the little things that you need to have in place and lose focus. That's an important aspect, and that's hard. Like, you're setting standards, or we want to set this standard, but why are you setting this standard? Like, what's the driver behind it? The thing that annoys me is, we used to do this back here where I used to work, and now we do it here.
Yuck.
Yeah, well, that doesn't actually work here. Like, I get it may have worked there, but it may not. That cookie cutter approach does annoy me a little bit, because, just because you've learned something here doesn't mean it necessarily fits over here from a standard point of view.
How would you go about, like, if we bring this back to the beginning, how would you approach changing that standard with the person that you've been working with?
So the example I gave at the start, there's a framework, let's call it, right? Yeah. And it's very dependent on the personalities. So if we arc back to the palette wrapping one, like, I knew what the personalities were, and I knew that if I put in this action, I would get this response. So if you've got people that are necessarily, not following a process, there's a consistency that's needed. You probably need to go through the process again, and from a learning point of view, just making sure that they've got it. And these are the reasons why. It's not just because I'm telling you to, but these are the ramifications if we don't have that. And the reason why we have it is this. That's really important. So you go through and give them the time. As frustrating as that might be, you give them that time. Then you mark off the fact that, hey, they know what it is. You can discount that. It's not just that they've forgotten. Then there's got to be, whenever they fall outside of that, there needs to be reminders, whether that's just a subtle conversation, whether that needs to get to the point where there's formal warnings and that consistency that I'm talking about, until that behavior gets to the point where it's meeting the expectations of that standard. Obviously, there's got to be a reward mechanism in that, and calling out the good behaviors and thanking for that behavior, and depending upon the type of standard and how important is the level of that reward and how that looks. But that consistency is the important thing. That type of behavior happens because you've allowed it to happen, and you're getting frustrated at people when you probably should be getting frustrated at yourself, which is quite confronting. So the consistency of just ensuring and maintaining that standard is the key, and using reward and recognition, using assertive conversations to create formal, processes needed, documenting behaviors if it gets to that point is probably the path, depending upon how they respond.
Something which helps me in that process is just remembering that it is a process, and that, like, we have to practice these skills over and over again, and that if you spend enough time practicing, then people are just going to be able to do it on their own one day without even thinking about it. It's just going to be an easy process for them.
Well, it's a problem now. So in that situation, it's a problem now. You've got two options. It stays a problem, or you fix the problem. And then if you're keen on fixing the problem, you've got another two options of, do I get it at its infancy and do I sort it out now? Or do I let it continue to fester and get to the point where it's a bigger problem than what it currently is? And it's going to be harder for me to rectify.
So in that scenario, it sounds like it's just, working with someone and making sure we're practicing and staying on top of it. what about if we have a team who are already meeting a certain standard and we feel like we can go higher? Do you think that's something that's acceptable to push? Or is that pushing the boundaries in the sense that, well, we're taking it away from an organizational standard and now we're putting our own standard on it?
Well, I reckon that comes down to behavioural standards. So your organisation standards won't change, but how you perform as an operation, so that could be how productive you are, how efficient you are, how good you integrate within the community. It could be a number of different things, right? It depends on the standards and how much you want to improve. And that's probably the way to go to become a high-performing team. And the example of becoming a high-performing team is just around continual improvement and building on past achievements. So if you have a team that is hitting standards and you want to improve that, well, you just got to raise that standard a little bit. You don't want to raise it too much so it's unachievable and it's not feasible for them to get that, or it's going to be at the detriment to safety or culture or any of those things, because you're just going to get too focused on that. But yeah, incrementally pushing that performance and expectation, setting that standard, rewarding that standard through in that maintenance stage. The other one too that comes up is just around reminders. So if you have a standard that you want to get across, one that bugs me a lot, and everyone falls into it, is like, you just send an email. This is our new standard. And you may even give a little bit of a context to it. And that may work if it's a smaller standard and you've got an awesome relationship with your team. But if there's no context or no human-to-human interaction, face-to-face interaction, and there's no backstory to that, and you're just dictating through an email or through a office memo sign on the wall.
Yeah, the old A1 poster.
Like, they're reminders. So they're exactly that. They're only there to remind people of agreed behaviours.
Yeah.
They're not, that's how we set a standard, or that's how, that's more an administrative way to maintain standards and remind people of those.
So it's just like a tool in your toolbox, right?
For maintaining standards.
Yeah, so it's like that reminder piece. Like the A1 poster can't hold you accountable. It doesn't have the power to open its lips and go, hey, don't.
No, it's just a small part. And that's the frustration, right? Like, you see that a lot within teams, is that people will put out an email or a sign and underline it and bold it and highlight it. Yeah. And it's like, you can feel the angst coming through.
Red italics.
Yeah. Coming through, in emails, they do it a lot. And it's, again, the FU principle of, I'm not going to listen to that. They may be full on right, but here's this keyboard warrior.
Yeah, I'm going to talk shit about you in the tea room.
Well, yeah. And you may even follow the standard, or it may even help the standard, but at what cost? Like what you're saying. Yep. The impact to that relationship goes. You are certainly draining from that relationship. That's not a good way to communicate those things. Yep. It's a reminder mechanism. But you see that all the time, post-it notes on things and, hey, we can't do this, we can't do that. It just comes across really poor. But if you've got a good relationship, it's only used as a reminder, and you will follow it up with human interaction and having those difficult conversations and the reward piece. That's okay.
Yeah.
That can work.
Yeah.
But if it's just the be all and end all, and then you're getting frustrated on the back of that, and then you let that come through the ink on the page, like, that's not a good situation to be in.
Yeah, absolutely. But we've given a couple of examples, right, of how we can implement certain standards, and there's the fear, and there's other methods. There's obviously a whole bunch of methods out there, and I recommend people do their own research in terms of what's going to be appropriate for their teams. But no, it's been fun reminiscing about the good old days.
Yeah, make sure you wrap your pallets better, mate. Like,
yeah,
Jesus,
look,
hard.
I've left the building.
But no, the biggest thing is just gets left is that maintaining standards. That's the setting one. People, get that pretty good, but the maintaining one gets really glossed over and gets lost a lot. But
absolutely.
No, it's certainly been fun chatting again, Scotty.
No, good chat.
Appreciate you.
Until next time. I appreciate me too. All right.
A little bit too much, maybe.
Right. Bye.
See you, mate.